This is tutorial number 2 on dangling participles, and the dangling participle rule is simple. Write prepositions and participles before their objects, never after. What do we mean by dangling prepositions and participles? Here's an example off the web. Listen to this. An example of the distinction between these two types of relationships we are all familiar with is how your doctor relates to you. Now that's 23 words, and I think you heard which one goes clank. Yes, it's that purple one, with the preposition. Now, in tutorial number 1, the dangler was easy to spot because it literally dangled off the end of the sentence, but I warned you at the time that that would not always be the case. And sure enough, here is a dangling preposition in the middle of a sentence. It's a dangler because it appears after its object. So what is its object? It's the word that answers the question, with what are we all familiar? And the answer is example. And I make objects green, and I recommend you do the same thing. Now, before we attempt to fix it, I'm going to do what I always do, which is to copy and paste, so we can make sure that as we edit, we're actually improving things. The way to fix danglers is to move either the preposition or the participle in front of its object, or move the object behind the preposition or the participle. In this case, we're going to move the preposition, but we're going to move the clause in which it is embedded as well, which is that. Move that whole thing to the front of the sentence so it now reads, we are all familiar with an example of the distinction between these two types of relationships. We'll delete that verb is and just put an em dash there. How your doctor relates to you. And we're now down to 22 words, and we've gotten rid of the dangler. And it's grammatically correct and doesn't go clank. Everything seems to be okay. But I want to show you something that many business writers miss, and that is making the topic of the sentence the subject. What's the topic of this sentence? Well, it's example because obviously from the way it's written, you can tell that the preceding sentences gave details on these two types of relationships. So to make example the subject, we could simply go an example of the distinction between these two types of relationships is how your doctor relates to you. We could even go a familiar example to pick up on this former phrase we are all familiar with. And what we now have then is, in only 19 words, a situation where the topic of the sentence, example, is also the subject. And I put subjects in blue and verbs, incidentally, in red. A familiar example of the distinction between these two types of relationships is how your doctor relates to you.